Thank you everyone for joining the Diagnostics Investors panel at Digital RESI March. I'm very excited to have a great group of panelists today who actively invest in the diagnostics sector. We have a very broad range of investors covering different aspects of and different markets across the globe, from US, Europe to Asia. So I'd like to especially thank Scott from Graybird Ventures, who will be moderating this session. So with that, I'll end here and then just turn it over to Scott, who will be carrying on with the discussion. Just as a reminder, people who are in the audience, you guys are able to use the Q&A feature in the Zoom menu at the bottom to ask any questions you have during the discussion. And the panelists will do their best to answer any burning questions you have throughout the session, and also save some questions for the end of the discussion. So yeah, now I'll hand it over to you, Scott. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire, and welcome everyone to this webinar. We've got a great panel today. We will start by introducing ourselves briefly, and then we're going to have about a half an hour or so of questions from me to the panel. I'll be watching the questions from the audience along the way, and we'll interject some of them, and then we'll save the last 15 minutes or so for questions from the audience. Let's start by introductions. I'll introduce myself first, and then I'll ask all the panelists to briefly introduce themselves. Say who you are, a little bit about your background and the fund or firm that you're with, and what you tend to invest in or where, and then share a fun fact, if you will, about yourself or your firm. So my name is Scott Gazelle. I'm one of the co-founders and managing partners of Graybird Ventures. We are a small, three-person firm that invests only in diagnostics. We like to joke that we are the world's largest and smallest diagnostics only VC fund or firm. We invest anywhere in the world. Our companies span Europe, Asia, and the United States. We're principally early stage Series A investors, and have generally been the lead or largest investor in each of the companies we've invested in. And a fun fact is Graybird is named after the Arctic tern that migrates 71,000 kilometers annually and lives for 30 years. So over the course of its life, it makes the equivalent of 3 trips to the moon and back. Sasha.
Well, yeah, thanks, Scott, for having me. Well, my name is Sasha Burke. I'm a partner with TBM Capital, one of the pioneers investing in life science and diagnostics and medtech out of Europe with 35 years of history. We have a $500 million fund investing in both sides, in particular of the Atlantic, where we have teams on both sides of the Atlantic. My background is in chemistry and finance, and the fun fact is that with our transatlantic presence, we thought that with COVID now it would be much more difficult to interact, but given the Zooming of every day, actually we are closer than ever. So even though we are not seeing each other in person, we haven't had a time where we interacted more closely than this. So quite strange in a way, but I'm very happy to be here on this panel today.
Thanks, Sasha. Martin.
Yes, thank you, Scott, and thank you for the RESI organizer having me. I'm with the HTGF, the High-Tech Gründerfonds is the largest seed fund in Europe with about 900 million euro under management in 3 funds. We do for our first investment only seed, and for us that's companies not older than 3 years, having raised less than 500K in equity, and they can be somewhere in Europe, but they have to spend some money in Germany. Our first ticket is usually between 500K and €1 million, and we follow up, of course, then later with the companies. And as mentioned, focus is Europe. We invest with HGGF across all industries, but in the life science team, we are agnostic. So we are also one of the few investors that always have and will invest in diagnostics, next to biotech, medtech, and digital, and also chemistry topics. And a fun fact, maybe I'm an immunologist by training, and I got in contact with the HCGF a little more than 10 years ago because I was fundraising for a diagnostics company. This didn't work actually, and by the way, the assets were bought by a guy named Igor Shahin, today the CEO of BioNTech. But anyway, so I got in contact with the HCGF and didn't set up this diagnostics company, but changed the side of the table and with HDF since then.
Great, thank you. George.
Hello, thank you, Scott, and thank you for the organizer to have me. This is George Lee. I'm the managing partner of Proxima. And Proxima, we are a venture capital fund. We are managing 200 million USD, and we managing 2 RMB fund and 1 USD fund. So our fund focus is medical device, biotech, and diagnostic. And currently we have 30 companies and within our portfolios. And in terms of geographic focus, we focus Greater China areas, but really looking for the global innovative medtech and which can address the huge unmet needs. And we love to do the hands-on help on our portfolio companies. So we help them to link with the KOL and also the hospitals, and also to help them to raise the fund through our network. So we have built the ecosystem in China, try to help companies to enter China market. So myself, I'm the engineer background and founded an IVD company and 15 years ago, and brought the first handheld HbA1c POCT solution to China market. So our fund, have similar philosophy, basically to leverage our connection and in both countries, and try to help great innovative medtech, to address the unmet medical needs.
Thank you. And Richard.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. Truly a pleasure to be back at RESI. Miss seeing everybody in person, but this works out really well. My name is Richard Kivel. I serve as the managing director of a European venture capital fund called Gray Bella Capital. We are a relatively newly established fund. My background is actually more on the entrepreneur side, running and building companies for the past 20 years on behalf of venture funds. Most of those companies were in Europe. Most recently, one of them was a pharmacogenetic diagnostics company in the UK based out of King's College, which was acquired. And before that, I'd done a number of other companies, either in diagnostics or big data analytics, instrumentation, that sort of thing. But became an angel investor and business angel for a period. And as I began sitting on more boards and activities within Europe, we built a team to establish a new fund. So Gray Bella Capital is truly a pan-European strategy. We invest at Series A, B range, meaning that we'll participate in financings that range between 5 to 15 million. We'll take a lead or co-lead position and invest between 3 to 10 million per company over the life of the company. So perhaps putting 3 million into a 5 million Series A, and then a Series B and so forth. We invest sort of across healthcare, but not in drug discovery. So diagnostics is really the area we really love, especially because of the importance of genetic diagnostics, combination therapeutics, many of the important areas we're seeing that are really making personalized medicine more personalized, involve great diagnostics and biomarkers. But we'll also invest in big data analytics. We have an organ-on-chip company that is actually a term sheet stage right now. We have another company that I invested in and serve as chairman of that's in Helsinki called BC Platforms, which is a massive data analytics company. We just raised 15 million last year, half of which came from a strategic investor that you probably all know called IQVIA, the old IMS Quintiles Group. And the rest of it came from European investors like Debio Pharm and Tessie. So we're pan-European across the platform of healthcare, but not drugs. We also have a tech focus as well. So a team that focuses on robotics and things of that nature. But healthcare is really where my heart is, especially in diagnostics. Our team is pretty diverse. It is very international, but we have a very strong emphasis around ESG, and have a majority of our team are actually women, including a lot of our advisors. And we really have a policy around making sure that we have women on the boards of directors of the companies that we invest. So it's a really, it's an important piece. We believe in the diversity and sort of the impact on diversity on the success of companies. Sort of fun fact, I guess, Gray Bella Capital, the name Gray Bella has a couple of meanings, but one of the meanings is simply the beautiful brain. Gray meaning sort of tying to the gray matter of our brains, and Bella is sort of the universal term for beautiful. So we like to invest in beautiful brains, smart people with great ideas.
Terrific, thanks. Well, let me throw out a first question for everyone. It's been about a year that we've been living in the world of the COVID pandemic. And aside from the obvious, that is, we're doing this as a virtual conference and we've all learned to use Google Groups and Microsoft Teams and Zoom and everything else. How has it changed the sorts of companies you're seeing and the way you're thinking about your investments? What new opportunities have come up? What things are not possible now? And then as a sort of a specific side note, are you interested or not interested any longer in investing in either COVID diagnostics or therapy? Let's say just COVID diagnostics. I'm going to ask Sasha to take that question first.
Okay, there are a lot of questions.
Yeah, take any part of them and we'll spread the other parts to the other members.
Okay, so maybe quickly on the first part. So what has changed or not changed since COVID hit? Well, actually, I think it didn't change too much. In general, as you said, I mean, just the way of meeting people is just different now. But if you just look at the statistics on 2020 versus the years before, we have never had a higher deal flow. So actually the number of opportunities we see increased because it's so easy to meet people, right? You just have a Zoom and then you see it. What though is more difficult, I feel, is closing deals. We did, right? So we had a number of closings, but I have 2 or so opportunities I'm working on now for more than a year, and because the legal discussions are just so inefficient over Zoom, it just takes forever. But eventually we'll get there. And the second part of the question on COVID diagnostics, just my personal opinion is that the train has left the station. We have seen so much. But this is big money game, of course, on the therapeutics, on the vaccine side, even more, but also on the diagnostics. I think it's hard to invest in something which is not already on the market and has a big push. So we have a company we invested in before, which is in rare disease diagnostics, and which changed topics to just enter the field of PCR testing for COVID, just as an opportunity, if you will, because they had the capacity, and that is now just windfall profits. I mean, it's multiplying the company's revenues on a very high number and volume, but they were commercial. They had everything ready, right? I think some innovative stuff which is still coming around, and I see new super fast diagnostics, 2-minute test, what have you. I personally, I don't look at that, and for me this is too late. But I'm happy to hear the thoughts, of course, of the co-panelists.
Yeah, let me have a follow-on question for any one of the other panelists who wants it. Certainly, COVID has, in my opinion at least, has increased the awareness of the importance of diagnostics. Has it changed, especially for those of you who invest in diagnostics and other areas, has it changed the way you think about allocating funds to diagnostic opportunities versus other opportunities? Are you more willing now to invest in diagnostics? Is there more money out there for diagnostics? Any one of the other three take that question.
Yeah.
I'm happy. Yeah, Martin, go ahead, please. I'll jump in after you.
Yeah, okay, sure. No, well, for us, it didn't change anything. So we just follow up a little bit on the first question. So since Monday this week, we are 1 year now in home office, so away from the office actually. And it has been the most successful year of the HCGF, especially in terms of exit. So we did the first unicorn in 15 years. So things work out well, but in diagnostics, it didn't change. But we do see more companies that were hesitant to approach us that work on the broader area of diagnostics, infectious diseases and antibacteria or infectious, topics that didn't want to come to a VC or thought they would not get any money before, but now they approach us, and not only with viral diagnostics, but also on bacterioma and these kind of infectious agents. And I think the only new fund that I'm aware of has been COMA, a small, you might know them, a European fund that set up, I think it was between 50 and 70 million, completely geared toward diagnostics. So I'm not aware that any other funds, have been set up with the focus of diagnostics, actually.
Great, thanks. And Richard.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I definitely I agree with Sasha. I think the train has left the station on sort of the COVID diagnostics, but I think that the area of infectious disease diagnostics and others is going to continue to become more and more and more relevant. And as costs are driven down and testing becomes less of a barrier, you're going to see those diagnostics at a much more ground level. So you'll see diagnostics being produced to predict, identify infectious disease at the earliest stages, and those diagnostics will be available in relatively remote areas of Asia, of Africa, and elsewhere, which will be incredibly important to maintaining some controls over the spread of infectious disease. If you can effectively identify, diagnose things super early, obviously it's no different than diagnosing cancer early. You're able to capture it, treat it effectively, and the patient lives. Well, with infectious disease, the patient is actually the globe. And people that are not diagnosed early, even though they may not be exhibiting very severe symptoms, or perhaps they're exhibiting symptoms that went completely unnoticed and unchecked, if we're able to identify that early, you're able to contain at a much, much faster rate. And I think that's going to be critical. And I think all of us realize that, there is no universal method to containing, maintaining, controlling COVID in an efficient way. Every country has a different philosophy. Every state in the United States acts almost like independent countries, and they have their own philosophies. Even though you could drive from one state to the next, the rules might be totally different. So I think the other thing that's going to be important is sort of universal mechanisms to identify treatment protocols or containment protocols. The diagnostics, I think, will be an important part of that. The other piece of it, which is sort of the state of the market, I think traditional diagnostics are always tough. There's no question about it. You've got reimbursement challenges. You have regulatory bodies that are pushing for much higher standards associated with clinical trials, et cetera. And very often the reimbursement just doesn't justify, what ultimately the diagnostic company is going to be able to achieve, right? It's not a drug that's going to do $1 billion a year. It might be a diagnostic that, is going to slowly crawl and grow, but they certainly can't afford a $40 million clinical trial before they even get out of the gate. So I think that it's going to continue to be an important area, but new technologies related to biomarker discovery and others, imaging technologies are going to continue to play an important role. Good investors are always going to look for the right deals to view. But I think generally the state of the market is good and stable, but it's not going to produce, I've still not seen a diagnostic unicorn. I don't know if that market is designed for that. However, new technologies that that we certainly see impacting the market outside of diagnostics, sort of these peripheral technologies, are also going to be important. So I think diagnostics will not be your traditional standalone, similar to, let's say, a pregnancy test. It's very much a single binary test. You're going to see diagnostics becoming part of, in a much bigger way, enriching clinical trial patient selection, much more towards combination therapeutics and things of that nature, as opposed to company A builds a diagnostic to predict this, and then they get reimbursement and they try to sell that. I think diagnostics will become much more integrated into remote patient monitoring and other parts of the healthcare system that have really exploded during COVID. Certainly remote patient monitoring and so forth has been incredibly important during this period. So if diagnostics integrate more effectively within the overall healthcare system in these trends, they're going to continue to succeed, as opposed to being one-off, one shot on goal tests as they were for so many years.
Thanks. And I don't want this to be an all COVID session, but I do want to ask George if we've heard sort of a US and Europe perspective. Are you seeing the same things in Asia, or is it a little bit different there?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I would like to add a couple of comments. So first, I think COVID, raised the concerns for the, faster response and to the infection disease. And, I think China take very, rapid response to COVID. And last year we have 40 COVID, diagnostic cases has been approved. And the government has the emergency fast approval track for the COVID. But I think that will not stop. And especially I agree with Richard. We are looking for the point of care, sort of accurate, earlier stage diagnostic solution. So we have invested the digital PCR, which is a point of care sort of solution, pure city solution. So I think that probably one way to solve the problem. I think that we'll have very interesting market for future coming infection disease, because currently the PCR take too long. And we also need the high accurate, high sensitive, diagnostic, solution. And in other way, we have invested a CRISPR solution, and also, can provide very fast, point of care, diagnostic. I think in Asia, in China, I can speak for China. I think the government now realize it's very important to improve the infrastructure and to set up the defense line for the future infection disease. The government started investing a lot in the infrastructure, and I think last year China has opened 2,000 new testing centers for third party. So regarding the market, I think for diagnostic, I think it will be effective because it's sort of preventive solution. And we see that will bring a lot of benefit for the patient, for the oncology market. And we are looking for the early stage, cancer diagnostic, technology. And we have looked at, like the digital PCR and also the mass spectrometers, use the inhalation to do the, breast, use the breast, to do the early stage cancer diagnostic. I think that kind of new technology has a very interesting application in China, because China can provide a very large patient for clinical trial. And clinical trial, especially for diagnostic, I think China can present a very interesting opportunity for new technologies. So I think that's the advantage I think I should consider and take that advantage. Yeah.
Great, thanks. All right, so the next question, moving sort of away from COVID for a little bit, what are we seeing in the sort of the realm of genetic diagnostics? We all followed the Grail saga acquisition, and I know from our standpoint, we're seeing tons and tons of companies that are suggesting they have a new way to assess the genome, and it's better than what's out there. And frankly, it's hard for me. It's been hard to navigate through that forest. what have you seen, and what do you think the opportunities are? What would excite you if some entrepreneur at tomorrow's one-on-one meeting showed up with a new genetic diagnostics company? What would you be excited to see? Martin.
Yeah, just maybe a brief answer. So I think one of the most important things is if this is, so the field is very scattered, and this is also true for the point of care diagnostic as well of the diagnostics that you mentioned. So the question I would ask is your solution, the things that you measure, do they affect treatment? And that's very important. Do they affect the way how medical drug classes will be given? So checkpoint inhibitors, will they be? Can they be analyzed, or the treatment be, be optimized? So this would be a very important question for these kind of companies.
Great, thanks. Any of the other panelists have a different thought on that, sort of what's exciting in genetic genomic diagnostics?
I mean, I will say I really liked GRAIL from the very beginning. An area that I think is fascinating and yet to really be capitalized on is the liquid biopsies. GRAIL had has a fantastic liquid biopsy blood test to identify early stage cancer. They were essentially founded by Illumina, who ultimately acquired them with money, of course, from Microsoft and Jeff Bezos and others. They were really very much, I almost think of them as a West Coast kind of company. I'm not sure you could have pulled this off in Boston or even anywhere in Europe. You've got a company there that raised, $2 billion prior to this acquisition for $8 billion. It's really unheard of. So that tells you that it's a lot more than a diagnostics model that they were looking to acquire. So I think I'm a fan of the liquid biopsy space, very big a fan of pharmacogenetic diagnostics, being able to better predict response and side effect profiling. There's a lot more to do in this area, and testing costs are coming down. So I think that it's going to be a very competitive landscape.
Great, thanks. Well, I'll interject a little controversy in this panel then, and to say that I'm not a fan of DNA-based early diagnosis. I don't think there's enough of it out there related to the tumors. And I'll admit a bias because one of our companies is doing RNA or small RNA based for early diagnosis. But what have you seen? I mean, so there's the stochastic challenge, right? There's just early on in a cancer, there's not enough tumor DNA being shed to get it in a small volume. So what are your thoughts on the panel? Can we solve this? Are there technologies that can solve this problem, or is it going to have to be something else for early diagnosis?
Yeah, Scott, may I share my comment, my thoughts? Yeah, so I think DNA probably not enough sampling from the tumor, and so that's reason we think probably next trend is the single cell sort of technology. So of course circulate the tumor cell is has been driven by the cell search, and after cell search sold that to Melanini. I think now you can see a lot of CTC come back, and I think this is a very good marker to monitor especially for the cancer treatment cycle. And also single cell they have much rich information. Now we have looked at the companies who can do the single cell capturing from the blood, so you can consider compared with the traditional biopsy. This is sort of non-invasive biopsy, right? So you don't need to do the sample, and but you just take the blood and you can capture the single cell, and the single cell has much a DNA, RNA, and even the genome information inside. So now we are looking at the single cell sequencing technology, but first of all you have to capture that single cell. So single cell, I think now you can see a lot of research on that. So it could capture a lot of information of the disease, not just cancer, but also the NIPT application.
Great, thank you.
Great point. really.
So I want to pick up on something that a couple of you said. There was a mention of a unicorn exit and a mention of the Grail valuation, but then there was also talk about reimbursement being relatively lower for diagnostics and harder to get those values. Is there a number above which, that's, let's say, a pre-money valuation, above which you become skeptical about an early stage company? You know, so just to be very specific, we're always concerned that to get an exit that's appealing to us or our investors, if we're at a high number before we start, we'll just never get there. Do you have, I mean, okay, so Martin, you're a seed stage investor, so I'm guessing you're not seeing high valuations for the companies you invest in. But what about the others? Sasha, Richard, what do you think? Is there some number that just gets you nervous?
Well, yes, actually, to be honest, because we are a dedicated late-stage investor in diagnostics. So indeed, this is one of the key questions, of course, we always have to ask ourselves. Is this going to be a feasible proposal from the companies? And we have also the advantage of one key diagnostic player being an investor in our fund. So we get the insights from a potential acquirer and buyer early on, telling us what would be feasible. And indeed, yes. So I think everything which is above 30, 40 million, which was what we see, makes it more challenging because, yeah, it's rare that there are those multi-$100 million transactions in diagnostics. So it's a good diagnostic acquisition or M&A if it's 150 million, right? So that would already be a fairly good one. And if you get in with 40 million, then you invest 20 more million. So what is in there? So that's indeed a fair question, indeed.
Yeah, thank you. Richard, what about you?
I'm probably least qualified to talk about this as we're a new fund, right? So
Okay, yeah.
I don't have a big N. You know, in our case, you know, our philosophy is we're never the first money in. So we're not doing the seed investments. We're coming in later. I think it really depends on the stage of development of the company. If we look at the valuation of the organ on chip company we're doing now, they're already revenue producing. They have, you know, clients. You know, the valuation we're looking at is in the tens and tens of millions, and that seems totally logical because of where they're at. If they were pre-development or they were still in the phases of, you know, getting their 510K, or if they were a diagnostic direct company, I think that would be more challenging. But it depends on really where the company is at. I mean, we also invest in Europe in general because there's an incredible arbitrage, as my fellow panelists know. I mean, the valuations are 1/3 or 1/2 of the equivalent companies sitting in Boston, San Francisco, and New York.
Yeah.
So our model very much is we go in, we invest in these companies, we grow them, keep them in Europe for as long as practical, and then at the right time, we're going to flip it into a U.S. Delaware C Corp, and at that point, that's where the exit will most likely come from.
But I might add that we have something more than 20 diagnostics company in our portfolio. And when I compare them to the valuations that we see on follow-on rounds, especially in biotech, you know, where we see a big uptake in valuations. So diagnostics founders are more decent and more down to earth, and usually they don't come with the higher valuations in the first place, so that you have to discuss them down. So, so they know the field and they know their peer group.
Yeah, I mean, we're Series A investors basically, and I think, you know, we're in that sort of sweet spot is when people get above 20 for a Series A, it's just by the time you grow the company to an exit, and like Sasha said, seeing that we just had $170 million exit, and we were celebrating that. That was a good number for us, you know. And then we read about the 500 million and the 400 million, but there's not a lot of those. George, the valuations in China are completely off the chart, it seems. Is that a fair assessment, or is that just the uninformed outsider's view?
Yeah, I think currently in general the medtech now is really really hot spot in terms of the investment, and because the Hong Kong as you may well the Hong Kong Stock Exchange has now new listing requirement for the innovative medtech and the biotech. So before the company need to have the decent profit in order to be listed, satisfies a listing requirement. But now, for med tech and also including the diagnostic. So if you have product already being approved, the pre-revenue company can be listed. I think recently there's one colon cancer diagnostic company being listed, and the market cap I think is around 3 billion, 3 to 4 billion. So yes, so I think that presents a very interesting example. So because China market is huge and a lot of patients who do need this kind of good diagnostic solutions, especially for colon cancer. I think that's present a big market. So I like Richard's philosophy. You can see this is a valuation arbitrage. So for any diagnostic companies, probably can think about to enter China market and set up the JV, somehow tap into the China market and generate revenue. And if the company even more aggressive consider to be listed in Hong Kong or the A stock exchange, I think that probably gives the company higher exit opportunities. So I think that could be the new exit strategy for diagnostic companies. Think about it.
Yeah, thank you. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about AI. I've seen a lot of companies recently that are talking about their, so let's say, special sauce, applying some kind of an AI algorithm to existing and easily available data, and hasn't been exciting to me. What are the rest of you seeing in terms of companies coming to you with AI, and particularly anything that would be interesting to you in just the application of AI to data? Sasha, I'll ask you first.
Well, I mean, yes, AI is of course a buzzword. So one has to look what is really in there. If it's just some kind of window dressing, or if there's really something very innovative you cannot solve, or you could have not solved in other ways or with other tools. And for us, this of course is an interesting element, but in the end, still the question remains what Martin asked in the beginning: is this solving a medical need? Is this changing medical practice in the end? And then AI is a tool for us to get there, not a means in itself or by itself. So if there is an imaging technology where artificial intelligence and machine learning can help to identify patterns, that's what we see a lot. Of course, this can be very interesting. The question, though, always is, how can this be proven, and how can this be protected and differentiated? Because I mean, if it's a black box algorithm, I mean, it's nice if in the end it says this has a 98% sensitivity and specificity, whatever, but that has been the challenge, from my perspective in the past, that with many of those AR tools, it's very difficult to make it objective and defend it. And of course, that has also been a challenge on the regulatory pathways. There were some very innovative approaches in the very recent past, also from regulators, trying to help companies with these kind of tools. So I think this is definitely the future, but it's not without challenges.
Thank you.
So here's an example in my portfolio maybe that combines nicely algorithms and an AI with a very traditional diagnostic tool, namely ELISA. So one of my portfolio companies that measure between 5 and 6 biomarkers, peripheral markers to analyze for dementia, including Alzheimer's and MCI. This algorithms basically solves 2 problems. So one is that you get it protected, this algorithm, together with the with the assay. You get an IP on it, and that's great. And the second is in Alzheimer's or in dementia, you get only very small clinical samples, right? The trials are 20, 30, 50 patients, maybe 100. But with age and sex matched patient samples and this algorithm, you get good data in, and you can train this algorithm nicely to get a high specificity and sensitivity. So it really helped to use this method compared to biomarker alone, because it measures and analyzes the ratio of these biomarkers to each other, and this was really helpful.
Thank you. Other thoughts from the panel before we move on to the next question? All right, so health outcomes research, economic analyses. How important is that to you in your decision to invest in a diagnostic company, and how important do you think it is in getting to a value inflection for a diagnostic company as you move forward to demonstrate, say, the economic benefits? Martin, you've already commented that the diagnostic must improve health outcomes or must affect decision making, but how about the economic side? Are you seeing that as part of your decision making prior to investment, or something you're building in as the company goes forward? Richard, I think. Oh, Martin, go ahead.
No. Let Richard start. I will join in later, maybe.
Thank you, Martin. Scott, it's a really interesting question, because I think health economics have become increasingly more important. When I even think back to the days of genomic health, when they were launching, they were probably the leader in identification of ways to justify the cost of the diagnostics, and they did an absolutely outstanding job, under Randy's leadership, just building a health economic model that allowed them to do really novel coding, allowed them to charge a justifiable market rate for their diagnostic. So I think it's incredibly important, and I think it's also important because we're seeing such downward pressure on pricing from governments across Europe and the United States and elsewhere, that if you can't justify that your diagnostic has a significant impact, that perhaps that $1,100 diagnostic may eliminate the need for a $7,000 procedure, that's a compelling story. But if your $1,100 diagnostic has a 30% chance of eliminating a $2,000 procedure, it becomes really hard to sell. And I'm oversimplifying. So I think it's a critical component of all of this. It'll drive reimbursement, and it'll also justify how people think about which diagnostics to recommend to their patients. It's not just about sensitivity and specificity. It's about the actual downstream effect of that patient and their disease path.
Yeah, music to my ears. My academic career was all based on health economics for the last 30 years. I'll give you one example of just really quick where a company that I was involved with, and Martin's in the CNS space with his Alzheimer's company, but this is a company in the field of psychiatric disorders. And it was doing genetic diagnostics to predict side effect profiling, but also very much response. And it was predicting or looking at prediction of response using biomarkers to help the clinician decide, does this patient go on olanzapine or risperidone or quetiapine? The challenge was that although the side effect profiles of these drugs is absolutely brutal, these are very harsh drugs to treat bipolar, schizophrenia, et cetera. The challenge is that the cost of these drugs is virtually zero. These drugs are old drugs that are off patent. So what would happen is, even though the doctor wanted to have more power to put the patient on the right drug at the right time, very often it was a flip of the coin. One doctor might recommend olanzapine as a first course, another one's going to recommend risperidone. At the end of the day, the cost of the drug, is a couple $100 a year. So their ability to sell or justify a $1,000 or $800 diagnostic for every patient was really hard, because their attitude was, or the attitude of the economists, or the finance people at the hospital was, we're not going to pay, $500 per diagnostic test for every single patient.
We know these drugs. We understand the profile of the drugs. We're going to start with olanzapine on all patients, and then we're going to go to this. So that was a big piece of it. Is the problem you're solving big enough and financially rewarding enough that the hospital or the healthcare system can justify it, even though we knew it was good for the patient and the doctors wanted it. Really hard to get reimbursement for that.
Yeah, I agree. Martin, you were about to say something on that topic?
Yeah, for us, it's an uphill struggle. So with all these early projects that we see, great solutions to big medical problems and new tests and diagnostics, the economic side is mostly always, not really well thought after. So the people look at the solution more than the economics, and I can only ask all the people listening and approaching investors in the diagnostic space, give it some more minutes and add it in your presentation. And don't approach investors, especially in Europe and Germany, with self-payer market that will do. So this is not sufficient, and it's underdeveloped. Thinking it through usually in these early phases.
Thank you. My perspective is that Europe is ahead of the United States in terms of organized healthcare, demanding information on health economics. What about China and Asia in general? Is this a big factor over there, George?
Yeah, I think of course I think the companion diagnostic now the government sees the benefit, and we need to pay to reimburse for that, and also the patient also willing to. Okay, so the healthcare reimbursement system in China is the government covers the basic requirement, and the patient if they want something new, and I think is they have to pay by the out of their pocket. So that system worked for a while, and for COVID, the infection disease like the TB, COVID, the government fully reimbursed that. And but for other diagnostic, the patient has to pay for that. And but I think that changed a little bit, and the patient now realize to do early diagnostic now is really economic wise. So so a lot of patients willing to do the pay high price for the early cancer diagnostic. So a lot of company doing that. Yeah, I just add a few comments.
Yeah.
Sasha.
Yeah, actually, I think this is an interesting discussion here, and the comment from Martin on just don't rely on self-pay is very true. I mean, there are many classes of diagnostic tests where it's clear that that this is to the vast majority a reimbursement play, but I think the willingness of patients. Also, even in Europe, but in the Middle East for sure, in North America as well, is increasing. And the willingness is increasing to pay for certain tests, and that is what I think we see as a trend: the consumerization of diagnostics to a certain degree, which opens up new different business models. And of course, marketing and B2C approaches become even more important, aside from the classic route of KOLs and guidelines and clinical studies and all the world we know very well here. So this has also been a discussion internally within our team, because this is the world we know, right? This standardized clinical tests and clear patient needs, health economics, but there is just different business models out there which are very interesting and which are clearly working, and I think are becoming more and more important.
Thanks. Well, we said we were going to reserve the end for questions from the audience, but I don't see any questions, so we'll keep plowing ahead with questions. I'm going to throw out one. SPACs. Has anyone had any experience with a SPAC for a diagnostic company? And if so, tell us about it? If not, what do you think? Is that the next thing for us, or is it not going to happen in the world of diagnostics? Martin, you're smiling.
Yeah, it's a good. Yeah, it's a good. It's guesswork, right? It's crystal ball. I realized that we looked at specs, and it starts to spill over from the US to Europe. I think there are two famous names in the startup world in Germany, Samwer Brothers and Angermeyer, who set up their own specs, looking for targets not disclosed. I would suppose they rather go for biotech targets rather than diagnostics because there's more money in it and bigger exits available. But maybe they have, with a spec, we have 2 years to find target. Maybe, you know, if 1 3/4 of a year are over, you might even consider diagnostics. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would chime in and say that the SPAC market is fascinating to me, just because I think for a lot of people, they think it's actually relatively new. The first SPAC deal I ever saw done was actually a Bear Stearns deal that was in 2007. So SPACs have been around a long time. They're now back in favor. Never have they been as popular. There is right now something like 370 or 350 US-based blank check companies that have over 120 billion in capital at their access that are looking to make acquisitions or what we call sort of SPACify companies. So you have a lot of money out there chasing deals. They have that 2-year window. They always have the risk that even if they select a company, that there will be redemptions, that investors will determine that that acquisition didn't meet their target. But if you think about it from the standpoint of capital chasing deals, it's a great time if you have a diagnostic company that's looking to raise a significant amount of capital to identify who are the blank check companies that are sitting on money, because you know many of them have gone far away from their thesis. You know, this is a sizzling market right now. It's not going to last forever. I mean, just recently there was a SPAC, a very large SPAC developed that was a leisure company. The entire model was around leisure. They could not find an acquisition and they did a biotech deal. There was another SPAC that was for a cannabis company about a month and a half, 2 months ago. The cannabis market wasn't mature enough for them to find a big enough acquisition to do. So the cannabis company ultimately wound up merging with a space technology company. So very often they move way off the blueprint or the design that they originally put in place. It's a hot market. Take advantage of it if you can. It's not going to be here in a big way forever, but it's an interesting world right now. A lot of money. Who would have thought this could happen in the middle of a pandemic?
Yeah. George, have the SPACs made their way to Hong Kong and China yet?
Yeah, now, you know, SPAC got a lot of, intention. And I think in Hong Kong, there's a couple of, medical SPAC already, I think they de-SPACed. And so, but, currently, the SPAC is only for, I think, US market majorly. But I heard in Singapore and the Hong Kong government, they are seriously consider the SPAC, opportunity. So I heard, probably end of this year, and they will have some actions.
Great. All right, so we have a few minutes left. I have one question I'm going to ask all the panelists, and that's as you're looking at potential investments, what is your thinking on sort of single test, single asset versus platforms, and how important is the possibility that the technology or the company you're looking at has the potential to either pivot easily or be developing a platform versus I've got the best test for this disease. Just go around the circle here, Sasha.
Well, very good question, and difficult to answer that very quickly in the last minutes here. For therapeutics, I would have a clear answer that it makes total sense to have single assets, because that's what we do actually, in fact, here as TBM. On the diagnostics, I'm not that clear. So yes, we also look at single asset single tests, but we clearly know that typically this is not as highly valued by acquirers. Than more to it than a whole portfolio of things. But yeah, I would say it's great. It depends very much on the respective area and therapeutic area.
Thanks. Martin.
Yeah, for us, I think I would propose that, looking in diagnostics for a platform is more favorable because, as you mentioned, you have two advantages. You can pivot if things don't work out, and for the proof of concept, you can sort of go for the lower hanging fruit or the higher medical need, even in the niche market, and from there, move our way upward to a bigger market or a more difficult area.
Great, thank you, Richard.
Yeah, it is a challenging question because I think that there's value in both. I mean, you could look at examples like Exact Sciences and just the incredible success that they've achieved. They're probably looking at a $15 billion market cap. Genomic Health is another good one where you've got really a very focused company around really a single therapeutic area, and in those cases, of course, oncology. And then, of course, you've got platform models that are out there. I don't think we don't discount either. I think it all depends on the therapeutic area, again, the health economic component, and the value of it. But I think both will continue, and certainly combination therapeutics are going to be a big piece of all pharma companies' future development in the drug area.
George, your thoughts?
Yeah, in terms of the diagnostic sector, I think we prefer the platform technology, and it's better to develop the multiple applications. But we do see biotech companies, now also they have the sort of companion diagnostic business unit. I think that's also a new trend. We saw biotech companies also think about diagnostic application opportunities.
Yeah, I think just from our perspective, I wouldn't say never, but I can't imagine that we would invest in a single test company. And in fact, most of we like to look at companies that have potential in either early in sort of the pathway towards diagnosis, so tools and facilitating approaches, or platforms that could be used to test for a number of diseases, for the reasons that we talked about. I say that, and probably tomorrow some exciting single disease, single test company will come before our attention. So I've learned that as soon as we say we're not going to invest in something, we see a great company and make an investment in that area. But for now, we are sort of a platform only investors. So we have a minute or two left. I'm sure there's things that I didn't ask. Any burning advice any of the panelists have to the audience members, the entrepreneurs, the startup leaders?
Maybe just, use this panel, use the people here. So here are the diagnostics investors, and be brave and go out and raise money for your projects.
Thanks.
Well said.
Yeah.
Yes, reach out, don't hesitate, right? We are all approachable, I guess. Emails, LinkedIn, websites, whatever. So if you don't know anybody of us, there will be a connection, or even do a cold email. It's better than just waiting for to be found.
Yeah. I'll add one last thing is when you send a pitch deck to me, say something about your technology. I can't tell you how many I've seen where the person uses 90% of the slides to talk about the disease that they're targeting, and then they don't tell you anything about the technology. It's easy to file those away. So that's the end of our time. Claire, I think we've kept on schedule, and it's probably time to wind this panel down. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed meeting all the other panelists, and hope we can do this again.